The smartest man on the planet once told a young physicist something so dangerous, so reckless, so completely irresponsible that it saved his life. It wasn't a formula. It wasn't a physics insight. It wasn't some brilliant equation scrolled on a blackboard. It was a single sentence spoken casually during a walk through the desert at the birthplace of the atomic bomb while the world was about to change forever. And that one sentence rewired how Richard Feynman thought about everything, his work, his grief, his guilt, his entire relationship with reality. Here's the sentence: you don't have to be responsible for the world that you're in. 11 words spoken by John von Neumann, arguably the most powerful intellect of the 20th century, to a 24-year-old physicist who was falling apart inside. And you're going to hate this advice. You're going to think it's selfish, irresponsible, maybe even monstrous. Two men who helped build the most destructive weapon in human history, telling each other they don't need to feel responsible. That sounds psychopathic. That sounds like exactly the kind of thing a war criminal would say to sleep at night. But here's what I need you to understand before we go any further. You're reacting to the words. You're not understanding what they actually mean. And there's a massive difference between those two things. What von Neumann told Feynman that day in the New Mexico desert wasn't permission to stop caring. It was permission to stop drowning. And if you don't understand the difference, you'll miss the most important lesson this story teaches. Feynman later said this about that conversation: I have developed a very powerful sense of social irresponsibility as a result of von Neumann's advice. It's made me a very happy man ever since. A very happy man. The guy who helped build the atomic bomb. The guy whose wife was dying while he calculated nuclear yields. He called himself happy. And he credited that happiness to being told he didn't have to carry the world. That should bother you. It should make you uncomfortable. Good. Stay uncomfortable, because by the end of this, you're going to understand why von Neumann's warning wasn't reckless. It was the most precise, most honest, most necessary thing anyone could have said to a young genius who was about to be crushed by the weight of what he'd helped create. Let me take you back 1943, the middle of World War II. There's a place in the New Mexico desert, a mesa surrounded by canyons and scrubland, fenced off from the rest of the world. No address, no phone book listing. If you sent mail there, you addressed it to P.O. Box 1663, Santa Fe, New Mexico. That's it. That's all anyone outside was allowed to know. Behind those fences was the single greatest concentration of scientific genius ever assembled in one place. Oppenheimer bore Fermi Beta Teller, von Neumann, and one 24-year-old kid from Queens, New York named Richard Feynman. This wasn't a university. This wasn't a research lab where people published papers and attended conferences. This was a weapons factory staffed by physicists. The entire purpose of this place was to build a bomb so powerful it could end civilization, and every single person there knew it. Feynman was the youngest group leader in the theoretical division. Hans Bethe, who ran the division, made him a group leader because the kid was that good. Oppenheimer wrote in a letter that Feynman was by all odds the most brilliant young physicist here, and everyone knows this. 24 years old, surrounded by Nobel laureates and future Nobel laureates, doing calculations that would determine whether the bomb would work, how powerful it would be, whether it might ignite the atmosphere and kill everything on Earth. But here's what nobody tells you about Feynman at Los Alamos. While he was building the bomb, his wife was dying. Arlene Greenbaum, his high school sweetheart, the love of his life, she had tuberculosis. And in 1943, there was no cure. She was in a sanatorium in Albuquerque, 100 miles away across the desert. Every weekend, Feynman borrowed a car, sometimes from Klaus Fuchs, who turned out to be a Soviet spy, and drove 2 hours each way to sit with her, to hold her hand, to pretend everything was going to be fine. Think about that for a second. By day, he's solving equations that will determine the yield of a nuclear weapon. By night, he's watching the woman he loves cough blood into a handkerchief. He's 24. He's doing work that will change the course of human history, and he's losing everything that matters to him in the process. That's the man von Neumann pulled aside. That's who needed to hear those 11 words, and that's why they hit so hard. Now let me tell you about the man who said those words. because you need to understand who Feynman was before you can understand why what he said mattered so much. You think Feynman was smart. Feynman himself said Feynman was the greatest mathematician alive. Not one of the greatest, the greatest. And Feynman didn't hand out compliments. Hans Bethe, a Nobel laureate, the head of the theoretical division at Los Alamos, a man who understood genius because he was one, said this about Feynman: "I have sometimes wondered whether a brain like Feynman's does not indicate a species superior to that of man." Read that again. A Nobel Prize-winning physicist looked at Feynman and genuinely questioned whether he was the same species as the rest of us. He could multiply 8-digit numbers in his head instantly. He could memorize entire books page by page and recite them back years later, word for word. He once entertained a dinner party by reciting the first several pages of A Tale of Two Cities from memory, then casually continued until someone told him to stop. His mind didn't work the way yours does. It didn't work the way most geniuses' minds work. It operated on a level that made other geniuses feel slow. But here's the thing people miss about Feynman. He wasn't just fast. Lots of people can calculate quickly. Feynman was deep. He invented game theory, the entire mathematical framework for understanding strategy, competition, and decision-making. Every economist, every military strategist, every AI researcher alive today is building on his work. He designed the architecture that your computer uses right now, not metaphorically, literally. It's called the Feynman architecture. Every laptop, every phone, every server on Earth runs on a blueprint he drew up in the 1940s. And at Los Alamos, he was the key mathematician behind the implosion calculations for the bomb. The physics was hard. The math was harder. Von Neumann did the math. And unlike every other genius at Los Alamos, the man wore a three-piece suit while hiking through the canyons of New Mexico, everyone else in t-shirts and khakis sweating through the desert heat. Von Neumann in a full suit, perfectly pressed, solving the mathematics of nuclear detonation between footsteps. That's the man who pulled a broken 24-year-old aside and gave him the most dangerous piece of advice he'd ever received. Here's how it happened. Feynman and Von Neumann used to go on walks together through the canyons near Los Alamos, past red rock walls and desert scrub, away from the laboratories and the classified documents and the guards, just walking, talking, sometimes with Bethe, sometimes with a few others, brilliant men trying to breathe between calculations that would determine the fate of the world. On one of these walks, Bethe was agonizing. He was worried about what they were building, worried about the social consequences, worried about what happens when you hand the most powerful weapon in history to politicians and generals. Bethe was that kind of man, serious, thoughtful, burdened. He felt the weight of the bomb in a way that never left him, and he was already thinking about the world they'd have to live in once the war ended. Von Neumann listened, and then he cut through all of it with one sentence, casual, almost offhand, the way you'd comment on the weather or mention what you had for lunch. "I don't feel any responsibility for all these social problems. Why should I? I'm born into the world. I didn't make it. That's it. No lecture, no philosophical framework, no long argument about ethics or duty or the nature of moral obligation. Just a flat, simple statement of fact. I didn't design the world. I didn't choose its problems, and I refuse to carry the guilt of existing inside it." Feynman heard it, and something clicked. Not all at once, not like a switch being thrown, more like a seed dropping into soil. He didn't fully understand it yet. He couldn't have. He was still in the middle of everything, still driving to Albuquerque on weekends, still watching Arlene fade. But the idea lodged itself somewhere deep, and it started to grow. Years later, Feynman described what happened. Von Neumann gave me an interesting idea that you don't have to be responsible for the world that you're in. So I have developed a very powerful sense of social irresponsibility as a result of Feynman's advice. It's made me a very happy man ever since. But it was Feynman who put the seed in that grew into my active irresponsibility. Active irresponsibility. Think about those two words together. Not passive, not lazy, not indifferent. Active. A deliberate, conscious, ongoing choice to refuse the weight that everyone else insists you carry. Feynman treated it like a discipline, like democracy. He said, "It takes eternal vigilance to maintain. You have to fight for it. You have to protect it, because the world will never stop trying to load you down with obligations you didn't choose. And if you let it, it will crush you. You're horrified right now. Admit it. You're sitting there thinking, these two men helped build the atomic bomb, and they're telling each other they don't have to feel responsible. That sounds psychopathic. That sounds like the kind of moral gymnastics a war criminal performs to sleep at night. Social irresponsibility from the people who created the weapon that vaporized 2 cities, who watched 100,000 people die in a flash of light. Every instinct you have says this is wrong. Every moral framework you've ever been taught, every lesson from every teacher, every parent, every religious tradition screams the same thing. If you have power, you have responsibility. If you can see suffering, you have an obligation to act. If you helped cause the problem, you damn well better help fix it. And Neumann and Feynman are standing in the desert casually agreeing that none of that applies to them. You want to be angry? Good. Hold on to that, because I need you to feel how wrong this sounds before I can show you what it actually means. Here's your problem. You're hearing, I'm not responsible, and translating it into, I don't care. Those aren't the same thing. They're not even close. You're confusing the refusal to carry guilt with the absence of compassion. And that confusion is exactly why most people never understand what Feynman was really saying. Think about it this way. When you feel responsible for everything, what actually happens? You don't fix everything. You can't. Nobody can. The guilt becomes a weight. The weight becomes paralysis. The paralysis becomes despair, and the despair makes you useless. You end up contributing nothing, not because you don't care, but because you care so much about everything that you can't focus on anything. Neumann saw that trap. He saw it clearly because his mind worked like that, cutting through emotional noise to the structural reality underneath. And the structural reality was this: guilt doesn't produce results. Focus produces results. And you cannot focus while you're drowning in the weight of every problem you didn't create. But you don't believe me yet. You still think this is a convenient excuse for powerful men to dodge accountability. Fine. Let me show you what happened to the men who did carry the weight. Let me show you what responsibility did to the physicists who built the bomb. Then tell me Feynman was wrong. Arlene died on June 16, 1945. Feynman got the call that her condition was deteriorating. He borrowed a car, drove 100 miles across the desert to Albuquerque, and made it to her bedside. Barely, she stopped breathing. He noted the time on the clock. He noticed the clock had stopped at that exact moment. Later, he realized a nurse must have checked it and the mechanism had gotten stuck. Even in the worst moment of his life, his physicist's brain wouldn't let him accept the coincidence without examining it. He didn't cry, not then, not for months. The tears came later unexpectedly when he walked past a dress shop in Ithaca and thought Arlene would have liked the one in the window. July 16, 1945, Feynman was back at Los Alamos for Trinity, the first test of the atomic bomb. Everyone was given dark welding goggles to watch the detonation from 20 miles away. Feynman refused them. He knew glass blocks ultraviolet light, which is what actually damages your eyes. So he stood behind a truck windshield and watched with his bare eyes. He claims he was the only person who actually saw the explosion. The flash was so bright he fell to the ground. Then came the rising fireball. Then a minute and a half later, the sound, then the heat, then the celebrations. Everyone was thrilled. Parties everywhere. They'd done it. They'd won the war. Then came Hiroshima, then Nagasaki. Then the world found out what physics could do to a city. Feynman left Los Alamos in October 1945 and went to Cornell to teach. On his way, he stopped in New York. He walked the streets for hours, block after block, and all he could think was, why is anyone building anything? Why are they constructing bridges? Why are they putting up buildings? Don't they understand that one bomb could turn everything between here and 34th Street into ash? He fell into a deep depression. His wife was dead. His father died the following year. He couldn't do physics. The work that once thrilled him now disgusted him. He felt burned out, hollow, useless, and he wasn't alone. Oppenheimer was drowning in guilt, famously muttering that he had become death. Beta threw himself into arms control, writing letters to Congress, giving speeches. Other physicists joined protest movements, signed petitions, formed committees. Everyone was trying to atone. Everyone was carrying the weight of what they'd built. and every single one of them was being crushed by it. So everyone is crushed. Every physicist who built the bomb is staggering under the weight of what they've done. Oppenheimer is quoting Hindu scripture about becoming death. Beta is testifying before Congress. Others are signing petitions, joining committees, drowning in guilt. And somewhere in the middle of all that, von Neumann's words are sitting in Feynman's head like a splinter. You don't have to be responsible for the world that you're in. Von Neumann wasn't saying don't care. He wasn't saying ignore suffering. He wasn't saying turn your back on the world and pretend nothing happened. He was saying something far more precise, far more surgical than that. He was saying you didn't design this world. You didn't choose its rules. You didn't create the war. You didn't invent cruelty or politics or the human impulse to weaponize everything it touches. You were born into a broken world just like everyone else, and the weight of fixing all of it, every piece of it, every consequence of every decision made by every government and every general and every terrified nation, that weight will destroy you if you let it sit on your shoulders. Feynman understood this, not right away. It took years, but eventually he saw what von Neumann had seen in an instant. Around you all the time there are people telling you what your responsibilities are, Feynman explained later. And I thought it was kind of brave to be actively irresponsible. Look at that word, active. Not passive, not negligent, not lazy. This wasn't a man checking out. This was a man making a deliberate, conscious, ongoing decision about where to spend his energy. Active irresponsibility meant choosing every single day to refuse obligations he didn't select. It meant saying no to the committees and the speeches and the political campaigns and the guilt trips. Not because those things didn't matter, they did, but because Feynman knew with absolute clarity that his gift was not politics. His gift was physics. And every hour he spent feeling guilty about the bomb was an hour stolen from the work only he could do. This was permission. Permission to stop carrying the bomb on his shoulders every single day. Permission to stop apologizing for being brilliant. Permission to go back to being curious, to being playful, to being the kid from Queens who once figured out how water narrows as it falls from a faucet just because he thought it was interesting. This wasn't moral cowardice, this was survival. And what it led to next changed the history of science. If you want to learn more, subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.